So let's take some time to think about fresh bread and new lands, the journey from despondency to hope. And I'd love to talk this through with some of you. I'm sure we've all experienced seasons of stress in our lives, and stress can be a very, very draining experience. If I look at the scale that Minirth and Mayer have got in their book, Happiness is a Choice, and they talk about the stress scale, the top one obviously is the death of a spouse, divorce, and in descending order, marital separation, a jail term, death of a close family member, personal injury, marriage, fired at work, marital reconciliation. As we come down, even retirement registers quite high up on the scale. Death of a close friend, mortgages of property that you're struggling to meet, a son or a daughter leaving home. These are all contributing to our stresses, illnesses, and we're obviously with our coronavirus challenge and lockdown issues. This is major stresses all around us. Trouble with your boss, trouble in the work situation, maybe a change in residence, change in schools. These are situations that can bring about huge amounts of stress, and right down to changing eating habits, changing living conditions. Believe it or not, even register going on vacation as a stress factor, and of course minor violations of the law such as speeding fines and so forth. My point is, there are so many things that invite and create stress in our lives. We need to deal with the tools that God gives us to grow well through the challenges that we engage with like this, and cause let stress be cause to help us grow and become stronger. So I want to aim at two things in this time with you. The first one is to get in touch. Where we really at? It's what I would call the red dot reality. Where are we at? When you go on a trail or a walk anywhere, you'll often come across a board that'll say, with a map on it, with a little red dot somewhere saying you are here. And you need to know where you are in order to find out how to get to where you want to go. You don't get to where you want to go unless you acknowledge where you are. That red dot reality. So I want us to do some red dot thinking about our own lives, and it might necessitate some necessary endings as we think about the implications of being where we are, but be that as it may. And the second aim of this time together is to get on top, to become overcomers. Blessed are those who overcome. And the overcoming phrase is used again and again, especially in the book of Revelation. So these things always make me think of a woman who said to a pastor, believe it or not, I always feel bad when I feel good because I know I might feel bad tomorrow. We sometimes are so focused on our negativity, and we are so addicted to our negative take on things, our negative feelings, that we struggle to even think of that we could live differently, and so we are stuck. So here's the first thing, getting in touch. Let's think about the story of Elijah and look at what happened in Israel's history during his lifetime. And the context is of a divided kingdom in the north and south of Israel, a divided kingdom. Ahab becomes king of Israel, and Elijah, in a time of great stress, called out to God. God helped him, fed him by ravens, and he had those miracles of God's provision. The widow of Zarephath, you might remember, God raised her son, and then there was the Mount Carmel. Wow, Mount Carmel, the 1 Kings 18 challenge, where he challenged the prophets of Baal and Asherah, who were all basically in the employ of Jezebel, Ahab's wife. And he challenged them to a contest to see who the true God is. And they were going to call on all their gods, the idols, to create fire. And they did this the whole day, and nothing happened. Finally, Elijah, you might remember the story, said, as they poured water on his sacrifice and filled the trench with water, and then he called down and said, God, thank you that you hear me when I pray. Please send fire. And the fire fell and consumed the whole bang shoot. The oxen, the wood, the water, the stones of the altar, he consumed the lot. I love his name, Elijah. It translates from Hebrew to mean the Lord is my God. And he was living up to his name, because that's what he was saying in 1 Kings 18. The Lord is my God. and my God will send the fire, which he did. We see him challenging the prophets of Baal, who was a god of fertility, believe it or not, and calling for rain from the true God. And Elijah was this, he was so in tune with God and what it meant to follow him that he was always a thorn in the side of Ahab and Jezebel. They call him the trouble of Israel. 1 Kings 18 verse 17, the trouble of Israel. But let's pick up the story in 1 Kings 19, and I'm going to read from verse 1 through 8. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, O Lord," he said. "Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Wow, what a story of a man who had reached the end. You might say he reached the end of his tether. And the time when you make that point in your life at the end of the tether, it feels like all you can do is make a knot and hang on. Well, Elijah was at that place. And maybe many of us feel like that place now with the coronavirus and the lockdowns and the challenges that are on us, all these things that are coming at us. And we're saying, God, how much further? How much more? What can we endure? And yet there's a strange sense and a strong growing sense that God is allowing a severe mercy, in the words of C.S. Lewis, a severe mercy. In the severity of what we're engaging, we will discover a fresh mercy. It's a reset button that the Lord is pushing in our lives. But let's go back to Elijah. If we look at him here, this is what he felt. These were his emotions. And hey, always our journey to growth and restoration does well to start with self-awareness. So let's start with his awareness. He says, "Only I am left." He's aware of his loneliness. He's isolated. He feels cut off. Secondly, he says, "I'm no better than my fathers, my forefathers." He speaks of this feeling of worthlessness. What is my life counted for? I don't think I'm up to anything. And then finally, "Let me die," he says. And he speaks here of a despair, three emotions. Maybe it's good for us to think about what these things mean for us in pastoral leadership. Can I just speak to those who are pastors and are leaders of others, and maybe those who pray for pastors could be aware of this too. C.H. Spurgeon wrote about the 8 reasons why pastors get depressed, and they've been helpful to me over the many years. And one is physiological neglect, just neglecting basic healthy lifestyle factors of eating and sleeping and exercise and social need and physiological neglect. So that's one that we see here hitting Elijah, because here he is, God ministers to him very naturally. I love that. And the second is the second reason why pastors get depressed is the nature of the work. There's an emotional overload that often comes with the intensity of what we carry. There's a spiritual warfare factor, because we're dealing with principalities and powers and demonic issues, and there's all kinds of subtle subversions and spiritual warfare factors. There's also the pain of rejection, when men who reject God play that out in rejecting you as the representative of the Lord. The leaders represent who the Lord is. And so often when people reject leadership, they're actually playing out their struggle against God. That's what it boils down to. There's a transference, in other words. So the nature of the work can actually be very, very debilitating. The third reason why pastors get depressed is because of their position in the church, which often leads to isolation, depending on the model and the culture of that church, but can lead to isolation and to extreme loneliness. The fourth reason is the failure to relax. The failure to relax. So we've been given a call to be a people who embrace a lifestyle which builds good rest into sabbatical living, and we're not working as workaholics. But workaholism in the ministry can really destroy any level of joy. Number 5 is the distorted ideas about the ministry, and especially about the importance of this work, and people's opinions about pastors being superhuman, and we have to measure up to that. So the distorted ideas about the ministry can lead to breakdown, to depression, and why pastors will often want to give up. Number 6 is there are no boundaries. No boundaries to the work. By the way, much of this can also apply to other areas of our life, but no boundaries to the pastoral ministry, certainly, where we feel like there's always a need in the world. There's so much more we need to do. We can't stop, and that can really be a problem. And in fact, I think it leads to a very confused view of a messianic complex, where we think that all depends on us, and we are the Moses going to lead God's people from bondage to liberty. And the nature of the work is so significant, we don't want to have any boundaries around it, and that's a problem. The work is the Lord's. And number 7 is too narrow a focus. If we become cause focused and passionate just about a very narrow cause, we don't see the broad picture. In fact, as we say in vineyard terms, we neglect to understand that we are busy with the quest for the radical middle between the already and the not yet. And this helps us to keep a broad perspective and a view of life, where oftentimes there are polemics that need to be married together, a both and situation, as Rich Nathan says in his book. The 8th reason why pastors get depressed is a confusion of role identity with self-image. Who we are is not equated to what we do. And sometimes what we identify ourselves by our doing, our behavior. And this can lead to severe depression. Robert Burton, in a very fascinating book called The Anatomy of Melancholy, said, if there is a hell on earth, it is to be found in a melancholy man's heart. So let's look at a few others that struggled with melancholy and depression, such like Elijah struggled with here. And Abraham Lincoln was one of those, and he wrote, I'm now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I will not. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better, it appears to me. Martin Luther, another person that struggled in the 16th century. He had tremendous periods of serious doubt and emotional distress. In fact, in 1527, he wrote the following: For more than a week, I was close to the gates of death and hell. I trembled in all my members. Christ was wholly lost. I was shaken by desperation and blasphemy of God. He found himself, this is Martin Luther, found himself subject to recurrent periods of exaltation and depression of spirit. This oscillation of mood plagued him throughout his life, and he himself stated that the content of the depressions was always the same: the loss of faith that God is good and that he is good to me. Joel Spurgeon would be another one. He was one of the great preachers of all time. He drew 10,000 people to his London church on a Sunday morning, lit the fires of the 19th century revivalist movement, and his sermons and books still influence those in ministry all over the world. From his little secret diary, we discover his deep commitment to Christ. At the age of 16, he made this entry: I vowed to glory alone in Jesus and his cross, and to spend my life in the extension of his cause, in whatsoever way he pleases. Years later he wrote, I pray God, if I have a drop of blood in my body which is not his, let it bleed away. This is the passion of this man. But the same preacher who displayed all this unwavering commitment to Christ and lived with great emotional turmoil, this is what he said, it was said of him from his boyhood days: dreadful moods of depression tormented him. One biographer wrote that his despondency forced him to be absent from his pulpit 2 to 3 months of the year. In 1866, he openly shared his struggle with his congregation, and this is what he said: I'm the subject of depressions of spirit so fearful that I hope none of you ever get to such extremes of wretchedness as I go through. And during these times of depression, he said, every mental and spiritual labor had to be carried out under protest of spirit. I wonder how many others around us can relate to some of these difficulties. J.B. Phillips, the great Bible translator and commentator from the New Testament Christianity, in the other book he wrote, Your God is Too Small, once said that God has never been known to disappoint the man who sincerely wanted to cooperate with his own purposes. But he also, at another time in his life, J.B. Phillips said, it's truly a devastating thing to be ill in your innermost spirit. He had these dark thoughts, you see, and mental pain that seemed to lock him in a prison with no key. Irrational fears would grip him at night. Unreal guilt swept over him, and his sense of God disappeared. During his worst times, God seemed remote and unapproachable. And J.B. Phillips called this the dark night of the soul. And his wife indicated that he had to cope with psychological disturbances and dark depression for a period of, listen to this, 50 years. Here's a man ongoingly doing battle with these issues. And there are many Christians, prominent Christians, who suffered with serious emotional difficulties and depression. Probably the most contemporary Christian leaders, with few exceptions, keep their struggles to themselves. That's the problem. Most keep it to themselves, and there's not this disclosure. When we continually hide our anxiety or our depression, we in effect endorse the emotional health gospel. In fact, I've been so blessed by Peter Scazzero's book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, which helps us to be self-aware, to work with how we're actually feeling, and then not to keep things separated and in a dichotomous way between what we're supposed to be and what we actually are. So we need to see that there are many people that have struggled. David is one of those. You read his Psalms. Psalm 6, he says, I'm pining away. My bones are dismayed. All my soul is greatly destroyed and dismayed. I'm weary with my sighing, he says. And he says, every night I make my bed swim. I dissolve my couch with my tears. My eye has wasted away with grief. Also, we read in Psalm 22, and these are the words that Jesus himself quoted as he owned his own emotional turmoil. You remember he agonized in Gethsemane? We read about that in Luke 22. Yeah, but in Psalm 22, Jesus actually took these words and quoted them for himself from the cross. And they were the words of David. And David said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. O my God, I cry by day, but thou dost not answer. And by night, and I have no rest. My strength is dried up. We could go on and on and on. There's so many. Moses struggled, hey? In Numbers chapter 11, we find him crying out to God. Although he had these moments of glorious leading of God's people out of bondage to liberty, yet he had these other times of deep soul disturbance. He said, why have you been so hard on your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid this burden of all these people on me? So if you're going to deal with me like this, please just kill me at once. This is in Numbers 11, verse 11 and 15. So here we go back to Elijah, the others like Jeremiah, Job. Well, maybe just a little bit more about that. One of the challenges Elijah had was the temptation not to throw a pity party, but to take his issue to the Lord. Some Christians would teach that Elijah was a coward because he ran off into the desert and had this pity party. But it was a time when he ran to God. I want us to see that. Jeremiah ran to God so often, and he wept as he did. He was actually called the weeping prophet. We read some of his lamentations, some of his struggles in Lamentations. The whole book is full of this. Here's a few excerpts. Look and see if there's any pain like my pain, he said. He has made me desolate. My spirit is greatly troubled. There's no one to comfort me. My eyes fail because of tears. I'm the man who has seen affliction. Even when I cry out and call for help, he shuts out my prayer. And my soul has been rejected from peace. So I say, my strength has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. This is Jeremiah, the man who penned in Jeremiah 31 that tremendous promise of the new covenant, of which we have become partakers. The covenant of hope, where God says, I'll write my law in your hearts. This is Jeremiah. And so we have him also struggling with his own inner life. And Job, the oldest book in the Bible, with the deepest of struggles, wrote about the agony that he'd gone through, and he spoke and even cursed the day of his birth. Why is a man, he said, why is a man allowed to be born if God is only going to give him a hopeless life of uselessness and frustration? I cannot eat for sighing. My groans pour out like water. My life flies by day after hopeless day. I hate my life, he said, for God has ground me down and taken away my family. But I search in vain. I seek him here, I seek him there. I cannot find him. My heart is broken. Depression haunts my days. My weary nights are filled with pain. All night long I toss and turn, and my garments bind about me. I cry to you, O God, but you don't answer me. My heart is troubled and restless. And yet God says, through all this, Job did not sin. Owning what we're experiencing is not wrong. It's the beginning of mental health, beginning of a new way of healthy spirituality. In fact, it's been understood that depression is like the common cold of the emotional life. Something in the order of 77% of women and 55% of men over the age of 40 suffer from it constantly as a consistent experience. It's a disease that love causes, is another way of putting it, or a thinking disorder. Hippocrates in 400 BC wrote about problems of love are the cause of depression, disappointments in love, and especially when we have reason to doubt the love of God for us. The result of that loss of focus and awareness of his love is experienced in depression. So James sums it up in James 5. He says, verse 17, Elijah was a man just like us. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. So, depression, perhaps just to say, Winston Churchill, who was another one that struggled with depression, used to say to his wife on a bad day, he said to his wife, the black dog has returned. The black dog, and he called his depression the black dog. But go back to Elijah. There are 4 truths that stand out for us from this 1 Kings 19 passage. And the first is this. And these are, I trust, will be helpful to us as we journey forward in overcoming depression. The first is this. It is okay to say, I'm finished. It's too much, as long as we say it to the Lord. So be in touch with your emotions. Learn to say it, but say it to God. If we only say it to self, but not to God, we'll sink into despair. We are not saying it in the words of Psalm 77, which is another fascinating passage about a pity party. We're not throwing a pity party. We're not saying it to invite the pity of others. We're desperately wanting to find God's answer. And of course, saying it means we will not wear masks. We'll not cover it. So say it. Sidney Girard, in his book from 1964, The Transparent Self, which envisages an honest society with open sharing. And praise God, many of us have discovered that in our churches these days. Sidney said this, we camouflage our true being before others to protect ourselves against criticism or rejection. This protection comes at a steep price. When we are not truly known by other people in our lives, we are misunderstood. When we are misunderstood, especially by family and friends, we join the lonely crowd. Worse, when we succeed in hiding our being from others, we tend to lose touch with our real selves. This loss of self contributes to illness in its myriad forms. John Powell of the Society of Jesus, in his book, Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am?, wrote this, none of us wants to be a fraud or to live a lie. None of us wants to be a sham, a phony. But the fears that we experience and the risks that honest self-communication would involve seem so intense to us that seeking refuge in our roles, masks, and games becomes an almost natural reflex action. William Miller, in his book, Why Do Christians Break Down?, has a chapter, False Faces, Why Do I Break Down?, says this, I break down because I feel the need to present myself as something other than I believe I really am. And the pressure to keep up the front and play the role is just too much. So, of course, one of the masters in thinking through these things is Henry Nouwen. And this is what he wrote, in the midst of a turbulent, often chaotic life, we are called to reach out with courageous honesty to our innermost self, with relentless care to our fellow human beings, and with increasing prayer to our God. To do that, however, we have to face and explore directly our inner restlessness, our mixed feelings toward others, and our deep-seated suspicions about the absence of God. I've spoken of this before, but that night when I had to go and look for my dad, and we searched all night, and he'd gone missing, and the next day when we, with the help of a search plane, located the car in the bush, and I found him having gassed himself and lying on the back seat of a locked vehicle, and stood back to kick the window in. I felt the Lord say to me, it's just as you're kicking in this window to bring reality to an unreal situation, know that I'm calling you to do life, to do ministry, to do church like this as well. Develop an impatience and an intolerance with that which locks us away from reality and from hope. And I went on to unpack the turmoil and the confusions that surrounded my dad's suicidal death. And I read in his journal how he wrote, I find it very comfortable to wear a mask. In my early years, I learned the skill after crying for someone to ask me how I really was inside. And no one ever did. Now I don't cry anymore or do anything. I just wear the mask and long for death. Well, it's far better to own where we're at and to acknowledge it. My dad, on that same day that he went off and committed suicide, administered to about 10 people, apparently very fruitfully, and none of them suspected anything. Such is the danger of our mask wearing. We can be like a crab with an exoskeleton. Outwardly it looks alive, but inwardly it may well be dead. It may well be in another place in terms of personal pain. So here's the first thing. It is okay. Elijah taught us that it is okay to say, I'm finished. It's too much. I'm under my broom bush. I want to die. The second truth that will strike us from this passage is that God never leaves his children at the end of their tether. He reaches us there. Hey? He reaches us right there. It's not the end of the world. He will meet us at that place. And I love the way he met Elijah. He met Elijah with natural help. He met him with servicing his physical need. Gave him sleep, water, rooster cook. Eh? Don't we love that as South Africans? Rooster cook. And I love the fact that God is always reaching out. Psalm 18 is full of that. God reaches us and meets us at our point of need. As he did with Peter in John 21. Remember Peter having had that terrible, terrible time of betrayal, having promised that he would be for Jesus no matter what, and then goes and betrays him. And realizes afterwards when the cock crowed what he'd done, and what a failure he felt. Here he was to be the leader, and he was betraying. And how Jesus engages with him at the end of John's Gospel in John 21 and restores him back to confidence and to relationship. I just love that. God never leaves us at the end of our tether. He meets us there. Huh? He often meets us precisely at that place when we acknowledge our neediness. The third truth that comes to us from this passage in 1 Kings 19 is that there are lessons to be learned at the end of the tether. We can learn things there. We can learn things. We can learn things about God, about how he provides, his reliability. As Psalm 92 tells us that in the morning we sing of his love, in the evening we sing of his faithfulness, God's provision. We also learn about Satan, his subtleties, his deviousness, spiritual warfare. We learn about what he does to try and bring us down. We also learn about ourselves, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our propensities. So we can learn many, many things at the end of our tether. So let's not waste that. In fact, I remember reading something of Bill Gates saying that one of the things that established him was the lessons he learned from the failures of the early years. We can learn from failure. In fact, if we fail, no failure is wasted if we can learn from it. If we can turn it into a classroom of growth, of insights for our advantage. In fact, we'll never be allowed to be tested more than we can bear. God often will take us in that Corinthians 10:13 experience where we, in the place of testing, is also a place of being established. In fact, oftentimes we, those who are working with creating leaders, we understand that a leader is never ready to be trusted until he's tested. Henry Newman said, often It is the dark forest that makes us speak about the open field. Frequently, prison makes us think about freedom. Hunger helps us to appreciate food, and war gives us words for peace. Not seldom are our visions of the future born out of the sufferings of the present, and our hope for others out of our own despair. Only few happy endings make us happy, but often someone's careful and honest articulation of the ambiguities, uncertainties, and painful conditions of life give us new hope. The paradox is indeed that new life is born out of the pains of the old. We've been experiencing much of that as we have reverted over the last number of years to narrative preaching in Fountain Vineyard, and had many people unpacking their stories and discovering the insights of God and the fresh things that God would give us. So that would take me to the fourth helpful realization in this whole experience of Elijah and the broom bush, is that there are lessons to be learned, and we will look at those at the next chapter as we engage with this. But can I just set you some homework about journaling? I really encourage you to do some journaling, because a journal will help us to get in touch with ourselves and our roots. It helps us become more concerned about the inner movement of our life than just the outward events. It's soul journaling. It helps our personal growth. It takes place in the context of prayer and Bible reading and worship. Often leads to action. So I would encourage an exercise in journaling as a way to grow and to get in touch with your own broombush experience. When we meet again, we'll talk about how to get on top, how to become overcomers, and the result of this whole experience for Elijah and the new lands that it led him to. God bless you.